The billionaire CEO hired a homeless man, then fell in love. What could possibly happen when a billionaire CEO hires a homeless man? And what could make a powerful CEO fall in love with someone from such a different world? Welcome to our channel, where unforgettable stories come alive. If you enjoy emotional romance, powerful characters, and unexpected connections, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest stories. Thank you for being here, for watching, and for supporting our channel. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you believe love can bring two people from completely different worlds together? Now, let's step into the beginning of this remarkable story and discover where it all starts. The most dangerous thing a billionaire can do is believe he can buy everything. Nathaniel Sterling had spent his entire life believing that money could solve almost any problem. On a cold, rain-soaked evening in New York City, however, the billionaire CEO of Sterling Enterprises was about to meet a man who would quietly challenge everything he thought he knew about value, dignity, and trust. 3 years later, Nathaniel would stand in front of hundreds of powerful people and call that same man the only person he truly trusted. But on that night, none of them knew what was coming. 3 years earlier, Evan Brooks had no idea that his life was about to change. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the sidewalks of Manhattan into ribbons of reflected light. Yellow taxis rushed past. Office workers hurried beneath umbrellas. Expensive coats disappeared into black town cars while Evan remained beneath the narrow shelter of a closed storefront, holding a worn backpack against his chest. It contained almost everything he owned. A spare shirt, a small notebook, a phone with a cracked screen. Nothing that could explain why a man his age had ended up with so little. Evan had learned not to stare at the people who had homes to return to. He had learned to keep moving, even when he was tired. Most importantly, he had learned to protect the one thing no one could take from him without his permission, his dignity. Across the street, a black luxury sedan pulled to the curb. The door opened, and Nathaniel Sterling stepped out. At 38, Nathaniel was one of the most recognizable CEOs in the country, the face of a global technology empire, and the heir to a fortune that seemed almost impossible to measure. His tailored charcoal suit remained perfectly pressed despite the rain. His expression was controlled, distant, almost unreadable. People moved around him differently. They made room. They lowered their voices. They looked twice before speaking. Evan noticed him only because Nathaniel stopped. For a moment, their eyes met across the wet sidewalk. It should have been nothing. A billionaire looking at a stranger on the street. A stranger looking back. Then Nathaniel's assistant called from behind him, and the CEO turned toward the entrance of a nearby office building. Evan looked away. He had no reason to care. But then he noticed something others had missed. Nathaniel had dropped a slim black folder near the curb. Evan stepped into the rain, picked it up, and hurried after him. "Excuse me." Nathaniel stopped. Evan held out the folder. "You dropped this." Nathaniel stared at him. Not at the backpack. Not at the worn shoes. Not at the rainwater dripping from his coat. He looked directly into Evan's eyes. "You could have kept it," Nathaniel said. Evan gave a small, almost tired smile. "I could have, but it wasn't mine." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression. It was subtle, barely there, but Evan noticed. For the first time that evening, the billionaire CEO looked genuinely curious. "What's your name?" Nathaniel asked. Evan hesitated. "Evan Brooks." Nathaniel glanced toward the glowing entrance of Sterling Enterprises, then back at the man standing before him. The city moved around them, loud and hurried, but for one strange second, everything seemed still. Nathaniel's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "Evan Brooks," he repeated. "Come work for me." The next morning, Evan Brooks stood in front of the glass doors of Sterling Enterprises and wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The building rose more than 50 stories above Midtown Manhattan, its polished stone entrance reflecting the morning traffic and the pale winter sky. Evan looked down at himself. The clothes he had worn the night before were clean enough, but they were not designed for a place like this. He had no expensive watch, no leather briefcase, and no experience walking into rooms where every person seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Still, he had Nathaniel Sterling's business card in his hand. The words were simple. Sterling Enterprises. Nathaniel Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. Evan took a breath and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up, and her expression changed when she saw him. It was not openly rude, But Evan recognized the hesitation immediately. He had seen it before. People noticed his worn backpack before they noticed his face. "I am here to see Mr. Sterling," Evan said. The receptionist glanced at the card. "Do you have an appointment?" "He asked me to come in." She looked at him again, clearly uncertain. Before she could respond, a calm voice came from behind Evan. "He is with me." Nathaniel stood several feet away, dressed in a dark blue suit that made him look completely at home in the enormous lobby. Evan turned. "You came?" Nathaniel raised one eyebrow. "You sound surprised." "I was not sure if you meant it." "I do not make offers I do not mean." Nathaniel turned toward the elevators. "Come on." Evan followed him. The elevator doors closed, and for several seconds neither man spoke. The silence felt different from the night before. Yesterday, they had been strangers standing in the rain. Today, Evan was entering the private world of a billionaire. "What exactly is the job?" Evan finally asked. Nathaniel looked at the numbers above the elevator doors. "Personal assistant." Evan almost laughed. "You are serious?" "Very. You know I have never done that before." "I know. You also know I do not have references." "I know that too." Evan looked at him carefully. "Then why me?" Nathaniel finally turned. "Because last night, you had every reason to walk away with something that belonged to me, and you did not. That is not exactly a qualification for being a personal assistant. For me, it is." The elevator reached the executive floor. Nathaniel walked through a quiet corridor lined with framed photographs and awards. Evan followed, feeling every pair of eyes turned toward him. A few employees whispered. One woman looked at his backpack and then quickly looked away. Evan kept walking. Nathaniel noticed. He noticed everything. Inside his office, Nathaniel placed a folder on the desk. The position pays $75,000 a year, plus health insurance and paid time off. Evan stared at him. "You are offering me $75,000. I am offering you a job." "Why?" Nathaniel's expression became firm. "Because I need someone I can trust. I do not need someone to feel sorry for. And I will not have you working here if you think this is charity." Evan looked down at the folder. For the first time in a long while, someone was offering him an opportunity without asking him to apologize for needing one. He picked up the pen. "What happens if I am terrible at this?" Nathaniel's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Then I will tell you." Evan signed his name. Nathaniel took the folder back. "Good. You start today." Evan looked toward the enormous windows overlooking Manhattan. Somewhere far below, the city continued moving as if nothing had changed. But Evan knew something had. He had walked into the building expecting a temporary job. Instead, he had stepped into a world where every rule seemed unfamiliar. And as he followed Nathaniel out of the office, he did not notice the way the CEO glanced back at him, as if he had already begun wondering what kind of man had just walked into his carefully controlled life. By the end of Evan Brooks's first week at Sterling Enterprises, almost everyone in the executive office had decided he did not belong there. The whispers started quietly. Some employees wondered if Nathaniel Sterling had hired him as a personal favor. Others assumed Evan would disappear within a month. Evan heard enough to understand what they thought of him, but he refused to let their opinions define his work. Every morning, he arrived at 7:30, nearly an hour before Nathaniel. He organized the day's schedule, reviewed messages, and learned the complicated rhythm of the company one task at a time. He made mistakes, but he corrected them quickly. He asked questions when he did not understand something. Most importantly, he listened. Nathaniel noticed. On Friday morning, a senior executive named Richard Hale entered Nathaniel's office with a folder in his hand and a confident expression on his face. Evan was standing near the desk, reviewing Nathaniel's schedule. Richard stopped when he saw him. "Is he still here?" he asked. Evan looked up. Nathaniel's expression immediately hardened. "His name is Evan." Richard gave a dismissive smile. "Of course. Evan." He placed the folder on the desk. "I thought we agreed the executive office needed experienced support." Evan quietly stepped aside. He had learned that people like Richard did not need much encouragement to make assumptions. Nathaniel opened the folder. "This is the quarterly expansion proposal." "Yes." Richard glanced at Evan again. "I would prefer to discuss it with you privately." Nathaniel closed the folder. "Then you should have scheduled a private meeting." Richard looked uncomfortable. Evan returned his attention to the schedule, but something caught his eye. A number in the proposal did not match a figure in the financial summary he had reviewed earlier that morning. He hesitated. It was not his place to interrupt a senior executive, but Nathaniel had hired him because he valued honesty. "Mr. Sterling," Evan said carefully, "may I ask something?" Richard sighed. "We are discussing a major expansion. Perhaps this is not the right time." Nathaniel looked at Evan. "Go ahead." Evan pointed toward the folder. "The projected operating cost on page 12 is different from the figure in the financial summary from yesterday. The difference is almost $3 million. The room went silent. Richard quickly took the folder and checked the page. His confident expression disappeared. Nathaniel looked at Evan. "How did you notice that?" "I was comparing the documents this morning." Nathaniel turned to Richard. "Is the number wrong?" Richard looked through the pages again. "It appears there was a formatting error." Evan frowned. "Slightly. The same number appears in 3 separate places." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "Then it is not a formatting error." Richard had no immediate answer. Nathaniel closed the folder and told him to have the entire proposal reviewed before the next meeting. When Richard finally left, Evan expected Nathaniel to criticize him for interrupting. Instead, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. "You read the entire proposal?" Evan nodded. "I thought that was part of my job." "It is." Nathaniel studied him for a moment. "Most assistants would have ignored that. Most assistants probably have more experience than I do." A faint smile appeared on Nathaniel's face. "Perhaps, but they might not have noticed what you did." Evan looked away, unsure how to respond. Nathaniel had been the first person in years to offer him an opportunity. Now, for the first time, Evan wondered if the billionaire CEO had seen something in him that he had forgotten was there. Outside the office, Manhattan continued to rush beneath the morning light. Inside, Nathaniel picked up his coffee and watched Evan return to his desk. The man everyone thought did not belong had just saved the company from an expensive mistake. And Nathaniel was beginning to realize that Evan Brooks might be far more valuable than anyone in the building understood. By the time Evan Brooks had been working at Sterling Enterprises for 3 weeks, something unexpected had begun to happen. Nathaniel Sterling was changing. It was not obvious enough for the rest of the company to notice, but Evan saw it in small moments. Nathaniel started asking questions that had nothing to do with business. He noticed when Evan skipped lunch. He remembered that Evan preferred black coffee without sugar. Once, during a long afternoon meeting, Nathaniel quietly moved a glass of water closer to Evan without saying a word. They were small gestures, almost meaningless on their own, but Evan had become strangely aware of them. He was also beginning to notice things about Nathaniel. The billionaire CEO could command an entire room with a single sentence, yet he often ate lunch alone at his desk. He could negotiate million-dollar deals without hesitation, but he seemed uncomfortable whenever someone asked about his personal life. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Evan returned to the executive floor to collect a document he had forgotten. The office was unusually quiet. The city lights stretched across Manhattan beyond the enormous windows, and the usual sound of phones and conversations had disappeared. Evan expected to find Nathaniel's office empty. Instead, he saw the CEO standing near the glass, his jacket resting over the back of a chair. For once, Nathaniel did not look like the powerful man everyone knew. He simply looked tired. Evan stopped at the open doorway. "You are still here." Nathaniel glanced over his shoulder. "So are you." "I forgot something." "You always do." Evan smiled. "That sounds like a criticism." It was an observation. Evan stepped inside. He picked up the document from the desk, but did not leave immediately. Nathaniel returned his attention to the city. "Do you ever get tired of looking at it?" Evan asked. Nathaniel looked at him. "At what?" "The city." Nathaniel considered the question. "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because from up here, everything looks simple." Evan moved closer to the window, leaving a respectful distance between them. "It is not simple down there." "I know." "Do you?" Nathaniel's expression changed. Evan immediately realized the question had gone further than he intended. "I did not mean that the way it sounded." "No," Nathaniel said quietly. "You probably meant exactly the way it sounded." Evan looked at him. "Then tell me, what is it like?" Nathaniel was silent for several seconds. "Being me?" Evan nodded. Nathaniel looked back toward the lights. "Everyone assumes you are never allowed to be uncertain. If you have money, people assume you have answers. If you have power, people assume you never need anyone." Evan listened. "That sounds lonely." Nathaniel gave a quiet laugh. "You are the first person who has said that to me." Evan did not know what to say. Nathaniel turned toward him. "What about you?" Evan looked down at his hands. What about me? What is it like being you? Evan took a slow breath. It is easy for people to decide who you are when they think they know your story. Nathaniel studied him. And what is your story? Evan looked toward the city. I am still figuring that out. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It felt different now, almost familiar. Then Evan picked up his document and headed toward the door. Good night, Mr. Sterling. Nathaniel, he said. Evan stopped. What? You can call me Nathaniel. Evan looked back at him. A small smile appeared. Good night, Nathaniel. After Evan left, Nathaniel remained by the window. For years, people had entered his life because they wanted something from him. Money, influence, access, opportunities. Evan was different. Evan had nothing to offer Nathaniel except honesty, and somehow, that was beginning to feel like the most valuable thing he had ever received. And Nathaniel was starting to wonder what would happen if he allowed himself to want something that money could never buy. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, placed neatly on Evan Brooks's desk beside his usual black coffee. He stared at the thick, cream-colored envelope for several seconds before looking toward Nathaniel Sterling's office. What is this? Evan asked when he stepped inside. Nathaniel did not look up from his laptop. An invitation. I can see that. Then I am not sure what the confusion is. Evan placed the envelope on the desk. Why am I invited to a private charity gala? Nathaniel finally looked up. Because you work for me. That is not an answer. A faint smile appeared on Nathaniel's face. It is the answer you are getting. Evan sighed. The event was being held at one of Manhattan's most exclusive hotels, attended by investors, business leaders, celebrities, and families whose names had appeared in newspapers for generations. Evan had never been to anything like it. He had spent most of his recent life worrying about where he would sleep, and now Nathaniel was asking him to attend an elegant dinner surrounded by people who could buy entire buildings without thinking twice. I do not belong there, Evan said. Nathaniel's expression became serious. You belong wherever I invite you to. Stand. The word stayed with Evan longer than he wanted to admit. That evening, the ballroom glittered beneath enormous chandeliers. Evan wore a simple black suit that Nathaniel had arranged for him, though Evan had insisted on choosing something understated. The moment they entered, Evan felt the attention. People recognized Nathaniel immediately. Then they looked at Evan. Conversations became quieter. Smiles became uncertain. Evan kept his shoulders straight. Nathaniel noticed the tension in his expression. You can leave whenever you want, Nathaniel said quietly. Evan glanced at him. Are you trying to get rid of me already? No, Nathaniel's voice softened. I am reminding you that you have a choice. Evan looked around the room. I did not have many choices before I met you. Nathaniel's eyes rested on him for a moment longer than usual. Before he could answer, a woman named Caroline Whitmore approached them. She was the daughter of a prominent investment family and someone Nathaniel had known for years. Her smile was polished, but her eyes immediately moved to Evan's suit. Nathaniel, she said warmly. It has been ages. Caroline. Nathaniel greeted her politely. Caroline turned toward Evan. And you are? Evan introduced himself. Caroline paused. I see. 2 simple words, but Evan understood exactly what they meant. Nathaniel has always had an interesting sense of loyalty, she continued. I suppose that explains why he brings everyone into his inner circle these days. Evan felt the insult beneath the pleasant tone. He could have responded. Instead, he simply smiled. I am sure Nathaniel has his reasons. Caroline looked surprised by his calmness. Of course he does. She walked away. Evan exhaled slowly. You do not have to defend me, he said. Nathaniel's expression was cold now. I was not planning to. Good. Because you handled that yourself. Evan looked at him. Nathaniel's voice softened. You do not need me to speak for you. For the rest of the evening, Evan tried to stay in the background. But the whispers continued. One man made a comment about Nathaniel's unusual hiring decisions. Another joked that Sterling Enterprises must have started a new charity program. Evan heard every word. He also noticed that Nathaniel heard them too. Near the end of dinner, Evan quietly stepped away from the table. He found a quiet hallway overlooking the city and stood near the window. A few moments later, Nathaniel joined him. You are leaving, Nathaniel said. I think I should. Why? Evan looked at him. Because this is your world, Nathaniel, not mine. Nathaniel stepped closer, his expression unusually serious. You think I brought you here because I wanted you to pretend to be someone else? Evan shook his head. I think I brought myself into a room where everyone can see exactly what I am. Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "They see what they choose to see." Evan turned toward the window. "And what do you see?" Nathaniel did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on Evan. Someone who walked into my company with nothing to prove and somehow became the person I trust most. Evan's breath caught for the briefest moment. Nathaniel looked away, as if he had said more than he intended. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Evan had expected to feel embarrassed that night. Instead, standing beside Nathaniel, he felt something far more dangerous to his carefully guarded heart. He felt seen. The morning after the charity gala, Evan Brooks arrived at Sterling Enterprises earlier than usual, hoping the quiet office would give him time to clear his thoughts. Instead, he found a small envelope waiting on his desk. There was no company logo, no explanation, only his name written across the front in Nathaniel Sterling's unmistakable handwriting. Evan opened it and found a key. He stared at it, confused. A note was attached. "For you. No conditions." Evan immediately walked into Nathaniel's office. "What is this?" Nathaniel looked up from his computer. "A key. I know it is a key. Then we are making progress." Evan placed it on the desk. "A key to what?" Nathaniel leaned back. "An apartment." Evan went completely still. "What?" "A small apartment in Brooklyn. It is close to the subway and not far from the office." Evan stared at him. "You found me a place to live?" "I found you an apartment." "Nathaniel." "Evan." His voice was calm, but Evan could hear the warning in it. "You cannot do this." Nathaniel's expression changed. "Why not?" "Because I did not ask you to." "I know." "Then why would you?" Nathaniel stood and walked toward the window. "Because you need somewhere safe to live." Evan's jaw tightened. "I have managed. You have survived." Nathaniel turned toward him. "That is not the same thing." The words landed harder than Evan expected. He looked away. "I do not need you to fix my life." "I am not trying to fix your life." "Then what are you doing?" Nathaniel was silent. Evan picked up the key. "You think because you gave me a job and a salary, you can decide what happens next?" "No." Nathaniel's voice was quiet. "I think you deserve a chance to make those decisions from a place where you are not worried about where you will sleep." Evan looked at him again. The anger in his chest began to weaken, replaced by something far more difficult to understand. "How much?" Nathaniel frowned. "How much what?" "The rent. It is paid for the first 6 months." Evan immediately placed the key back on the desk. "Then I cannot accept it." Nathaniel stared at him. "Why?" "Because I will not owe you my life." Nathaniel's expression softened. "Evan, you do not owe me anything." "That is easy for you to say." "Then let me make it simple." Nathaniel walked back to his desk and sat down. "Take the apartment. Pay me back when you can." Evan blinked. "You want me to pay you back?" "Yes." "For 6 months of rent." "Eventually." Evan studied him. "You are serious." "Completely." For the first time that morning, Evan smiled. It was small, but genuine. "You are an unusual man, Nathaniel Sterling." "I have been told." Evan took the key again. "Fine. I will take it." Nathaniel nodded. "Good. But I am paying you back." "I know." Evan turned toward the door, then stopped. "Thank you." Nathaniel looked at him. "You are welcome." Evan left, and Nathaniel watched the door close behind him. Neither man knew that the apartment would become the first place Evan could truly call his own in years. But Evan did not know something else either. Nathaniel had chosen the apartment carefully, not because he wanted control over Evan's life, but because he had started paying attention to the small details that no one else seemed to notice. He knew which subway line Evan used. He knew Evan preferred quiet neighborhoods. He knew Evan did not like being given expensive gifts. And somewhere along the way, Nathaniel had begun remembering these things without even trying. That evening, Evan stood alone inside his new apartment. It was small, warm, and completely empty except for a few basic pieces of furniture. He placed his worn backpack on the floor and looked around. For the first time in a long time, he had a door he could lock behind him, a bed that belonged to him, a place where he could wake up without wondering where he would go next. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the key in his hand. He had spent so long believing that accepting help meant losing his independence. But Nathaniel had not asked him to become someone else. He had simply opened a door. And Evan was beginning to wonder if the man who had opened that door was becoming far more important to him than he was ready to admit. Nathaniel Sterling had spent years learning how to keep people at a comfortable distance, But Evan Brooks had quietly crossed that distance without asking permission. It happened in small ways at first. Evan would leave a cup of black coffee on Nathaniel's desk before the morning meetings. Nathaniel would send Evan a message asking if he had eaten lunch. Their conversations lasted longer than necessary, and neither seemed eager to be the first to end them. But there was one thing Nathaniel could not ignore. He was falling for the man he had originally hired as an assistant. Evan felt the change too, and that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. The problem was not that Nathaniel was kind. The problem was that Evan had started believing the kindness meant something. One Friday evening, Evan was preparing to leave the office when Nathaniel appeared beside his desk. "Do you have plans tonight?" Evan looked up. "Not really. Dinner." Evan hesitated. "With you?" Nathaniel's expression softened. That was the idea. They went to a quiet restaurant in Greenwich Village, far from the formal events where Nathaniel was usually seen. For the first time, they sat across from each other without a desk between them. They talked about ordinary things. Evan told stories about growing up in different parts of the country. Nathaniel admitted that he had never been good at relaxing. Evan laughed at that. "You are a billionaire. You can afford to relax." Nathaniel smiled. "Apparently, it is not for sale." The evening felt easy until Evan noticed a familiar face across the room. Caroline Whitmore had seen them together. Her expression was unreadable, but Evan knew exactly what she would assume. The next morning, rumors began spreading through the executive office. By Monday, Evan had heard enough. Someone had told him that Nathaniel was becoming distracted. Someone else suggested that Evan was using his position to gain access to the CEO. Evan tried to ignore it, but the words followed him everywhere. Then Richard Hale entered Nathaniel's office with a serious expression. Evan was there reviewing the schedule. Richard placed a folder on the desk. "We need to discuss the situation." Nathaniel looked up. "What situation?" Richard glanced toward Evan. "The rumors." Evan immediately understood. Nathaniel's face became unreadable. "Leave." Richard blinked. "Nathaniel." "I said leave." After Richard closed the door, Evan remained silent. Nathaniel looked at him. "You heard him." "I heard enough. None of it matters." "It matters to me." Evan gathered the papers on his desk. "I think I should resign." Nathaniel stood. "No." Evan looked at him. "You cannot tell me what to do." Nathaniel stopped. Evan's voice was calm, but his eyes were hurt. "You gave me a job. You helped me find an apartment. You invited me into your world. And now everyone thinks I am here because I am attached to you. I do not care what they think." "I do." Nathaniel moved closer. "Why?" Evan looked away. "Because I need to know that I earned my place here." Nathaniel's voice softened. "You did." Evan shook his head. "Maybe you believe that. But I do not know if I can." The words left Nathaniel silent. Evan placed his resignation letter on the desk. "I will finish the week." Nathaniel stared at the paper. "You are not leaving." "I think I have to." For the first time since Evan had met him, Nathaniel looked genuinely unsettled. "Evan." Evan paused at the door. Nathaniel wanted to say something, anything, that would make him stay. But the words he needed were the words he was most afraid to speak. He could not tell Evan that the office felt empty when he was gone. He could not admit that the apartment key on Evan's desk had become a symbol of how deeply he cared. He could not explain that losing Evan had suddenly become more frightening than losing any business deal in his entire career. So Nathaniel said nothing. Evan walked away, and for the first time, Nathaniel understood that money, power, and influence could open almost any door in the world. But none of them could force the one person he wanted most to walk back through his. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Sterling found himself counting the hours until Monday morning for a reason that had nothing to do with business. Evan Brooks had 1 week left at Sterling Enterprises, and every passing day felt like a reminder that Nathaniel had failed to say the one thing that mattered. On Monday, Evan arrived at 7:30 as usual. He worked quietly, answered emails, organized Nathaniel's schedule, and completed every task as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. The easy conversations were gone. The coffee on Nathaniel's desk stopped appearing. Evan no longer stayed after hours. Every interaction was polite, professional, and distant. Nathaniel hated it. He had built an entire empire by solving problems quickly, yet he could not solve the one problem sitting 6 feet away from him. On Thursday evening, Evan placed the final documents on Nathaniel's desk. "Everything is organized for next week," he said. Nathaniel looked at him. "You are really doing this?" Evan nodded. "I think it is the right thing." For who? Evan hesitated. For both of us. Nathaniel stood. You keep saying that. Because it is true. No, Evan. It is what you tell yourself because it is easier than admitting you are afraid. Evan's expression changed. Afraid of what? Nathaniel took a breath. This was the moment he had been avoiding. Afraid that you do not belong here. Evan looked away. Maybe I do not. Nathaniel walked around the desk. Then let me tell you something you need to hear. Evan remained silent. You think I hired you because I felt sorry for you. Evan's eyes lifted. Did you not? No, Nathaniel's voice was steady. I hired you because you were the first person I had met in years who treated me like a person instead of a position. Evan stared at him. Nathaniel continued. That night in the rain, you could have ignored me. You could have taken my folder and walked away. Instead, you ran through the rain to return it. That does not explain the job. It explains everything. Nathaniel's voice became quieter. You were standing there with almost nothing, and somehow you were still thinking about what belonged to someone else. Do you know how rare that is? Evan looked down. Nathaniel, I did not hire you because I thought you needed saving. Nathaniel paused. I hired you because I needed someone like you in my life. The room became completely silent. Evan's eyes filled with uncertainty. You should not say things like that. Why? Because I do not know what they mean. Nathaniel stepped closer, but stopped before crossing the distance between them. Then I will make it clear. He looked directly at Evan. I do not want you to stay because I am your employer. I do not want you to stay because I gave you a job or helped you find an apartment. I want you to stay because I care about you. Evan's voice was barely above a whisper. You care about me. More than I should. Evan closed his eyes for a moment. I thought you were trying to save me. Nathaniel shook his head. Evan, you saved me first. Evan looked at him again. Nathaniel finally allowed himself to say the words he had been holding back. I love you. The confession did not come with a grand gesture or a room full of witnesses. It was simply the truth, spoken quietly between two people who had spent months learning how to trust each other. Evan stood completely still. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the apartment key Nathaniel had given him months earlier. He placed it on the desk between them. Nathaniel looked at it, confused. What does that mean? Evan smiled through the emotion in his eyes. It means I am not giving it back. Nathaniel's expression softened. Evan took a breath. I still want to pay you back for every dollar. Nathaniel smiled. I know, and I still want to earn my place. You already have. Evan looked at him. Then maybe I should stay. For the first time in days, Nathaniel smiled without restraint. Outside the windows, Manhattan continued glowing beneath the evening sky. Evan had once believed that accepting help meant losing himself. Now he understood something different. Sometimes, letting someone into your life did not mean giving up your independence. Sometimes, it meant finally allowing yourself to be known. And Nathaniel had finally told him the truth. He had never hired Evan to save him. He had hired him because, somewhere between a rainy sidewalk and a quiet office high above Manhattan, Nathaniel had found the one person who made his enormous world feel like home. 3 years later, Nathaniel Sterling stood beneath the warm lights of a crowded Manhattan ballroom, surrounded by investors, executives, and people who had spent their entire lives moving through rooms like this one. The room was filled with conversation, quiet laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Nathaniel barely noticed any of it. His attention was fixed on the man standing beside him. Evan Brooks looked completely at ease now, dressed in a simple black suit that fit him perfectly, his expression calm as he listened to someone speaking nearby. It was difficult for anyone in the room to imagine the first time Nathaniel had seen him. A rainy sidewalk, a worn backpack, a man with almost nothing who had still stopped to return a folder that did not belong to him. 3 years had changed many things. Evan now had a career he had built through his own effort. He had become one of the most trusted people in Sterling Enterprises, not because Nathaniel had given him a title, but because Evan had earned the respect of everyone around him. He had also built a life outside the company, one that belonged entirely to him. The apartment in Brooklyn had eventually become a home, filled with books, plants, and small reminders of the life he had chosen for himself. Nathaniel had never taken that independence away from him. In fact, he had learned to admire it. Their relationship had not been easy. There had been misunderstandings, difficult conversations, and moments when both men had wondered whether two people from such different worlds could truly build a future together. But they had stayed. They had learned. They had chosen each other again and again. The host of the evening stepped onto the stage and welcomed the guests. Then he invited Nathaniel to speak. Nathaniel walked to the microphone and looked across the ballroom. His eyes found Evan immediately. Most people in this room know me as the Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Enterprises, he began. Some know me as a businessman. Some know me as a billionaire. But there is one thing I have learned in the last 3 years that has nothing to do with business. The room became quiet. Evan watched him carefully. Nathaniel continued. The greatest value in another person is not measured by their bank account, their family name, or the position they hold. He paused. It is measured by the way they treat people when they have nothing to gain. Evan's eyes softened. Nathaniel looked directly at him. 3 years ago, I met someone who taught me that lesson. A few people turned toward Evan. He smiled, slightly embarrassed, but Nathaniel continued. He had no idea who I was. He did not know my name. He did not know what I owned. He simply saw something that belonged to me and chose to return it. Nathaniel stepped away from the microphone. That person became my most trusted colleague, my closest friend, and the love of my life. The room erupted in warm applause. Evan lowered his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the attention. When Nathaniel returned to his side, Evan whispered, "You really had to tell everyone?" Nathaniel smiled. "I thought it was time." Evan shook his head, but he was smiling too. Later that night, after the ballroom had emptied, they returned home together. The city stretched beneath their windows, bright and endless. Evan stood beside the glass, remembering the night when he had first seen Nathaniel across a rain-soaked sidewalk. "Do you ever think about that night?" Evan asked. Nathaniel came to stand beside him. "All the time. I almost kept walking." "I know." Evan looked at him. "What would have happened if I had?" Nathaniel considered the question. "I probably would have gone into the building, taken another business meeting, and forgotten about the folder." Evan smiled. "And I would still be out there somewhere." Nathaniel looked at him. "Maybe." Then he reached for Evan's hand. "But you did not keep walking." Evan looked down at their joined hands. "No, I did not." Outside, the rain began to fall softly over Manhattan, just as it had on the night they met. But this time, Evan was not standing beneath a closed storefront with a worn backpack and nowhere to go. He had a home. He had a life he had rebuilt with his own hands. And beside him stood the man who had once offered him a job when the world had offered him very little. Nathaniel had thought he was giving Evan a second chance. Evan had thought Nathaniel was saving him. But the truth had always been something much more beautiful. Nathaniel gave Evan a door to walk through. Evan gave Nathaniel a reason to open it. And somewhere between a rainy sidewalk, a forgotten folder, and 2 lives that were never supposed to meet, they had found something neither money nor power could ever purchase. They had found a place to belong, and for the first time, neither of them had to face the world alone.